Welcome everyone to another incredible Sales Hacker live event. Thank you so much for being here. We have got an incredible panel of speakers, and I can't wait for you to meet them. So as some folks are rolling in, let's just do some quick housekeeping. Go down to the chat box and tell us your name, your role, where you're tuning in from. We want to keep this super interactive, so definitely chat with the other attendees. That's one of the awesome benefits of joining live, so be sure to chat with the folks who join. If you have questions for the panelists, you will find a Q&A box, and please ask any questions of the panelists in the Q&A box just so that they don't get lost in the chat. All right, well, today's topic is all about the processes, the tactics, technology that top performing revenue and sales leaders are using to enable their teams to sell. Mindtickle partnered with Heinz Marketing to find out how 250 plus top performing revenue sales leaders are around the globe are preparing their teams to sell. So they're sharing some really cool key findings from their new report, but even better, they have brought in a really stellar panel to weigh in. So this is going to be a really great time. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm really excited for you to meet the folks that are here today. I would love to do some introductions. Hannah, let's start with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am Hannah Goldberg, and currently I am at Zoom. I head up our sales organization for major accounts, and you can think of that as current and future strategic partners. I've been here now for about 2.5 years, and prior to Zoom, I was at LinkedIn for 11 years. So really excited and invested in investing in our talent to do the best that they can every day to drive towards the numbers. So this topic is very, very close to home for me.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Mark, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, my name is Mark Casaglo. I lead global sales at Outreach, and I just guess I'm a sales guy mostly. I know I do a few other things on the side, but I enjoy getting into how to increase productivity for salespeople and how to become a better seller myself.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. Stephanie.
Yep. Hey, everybody. I'm Stephanie Middaugh. I'm the Director of Enablement at WorkRamp. Previously to this, I actually worked with Hannah for a hot second over at Zoom. And then before that, I was at Divvy, a financial tech startup based in the Utah area. This is my life. I live and breathe like how to make sales reps better and how to kind of enable them from that perspective. So super excited to jump in and kind of talk about our topic today.
I'm so excited too. Thank you, Stephanie. And last and certainly not least, Ahmed.
Ahmed Hadid. I'm with Mindtickle. We are in the Sales Enablement platform to deliver exactly some of the things that Stephanie and others and her peers do for those like Hannah and Mark. I'm kind of at the intersection between the two. One of the reasons I came here, and I've been in enterprise selling for far too long, but it's because I found an opportunity to fill that gap that I've always been seeing that's missing, is how do we help enable and keep our sales performers at their highest level consistently. So that's, again, excited as with the panel, and really excited at what the panel can provide to all of you for their insights, along with some of the things that we will share from the report.
Me too. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, Ahmed is your moderator today. I'm very excited. And thank you so much all for being here. Ahmed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I am going to present here. Let's see if I can do that properly.
Beautiful.
There we go. So you've heard from our wonderfully beautiful and handsome panel there, and get those insights. Sam had mentioned that the basis of the metrics and the insights that we are going to be sharing is based on the survey of 250 sales and revenue leaders. This Heinz report, just so you all know, if you're interested, at the end of the webinar, you'll find a way to get that and download it as part of the gifts of coming onto here, so you can follow through and review that in more detail. But we're going to give you the highlights, and just to kind of kick it off. The idea is here, what are the kind of the key issues that are impacting, a lot of the sales team's abilities to be ready to win, in especially today's fast-changing environment. We all know no matter what industry we're in, we're being impacted in some fashion or form. And it's a highly evolved, sales continues to be highly evolving. And the other is kind of the challenges that between, traditional enablement and training, and how that's been evolving and moving. And love that, Stephanie's here to provide her insights. Also being with a company that does provide enablement and being the enablement leader there. So that, and then, hopefully hone in on some specific areas, strategies that you all can take away. Not just from here, we can give you the insights, but perspectives that the panel can share with you. So with that, want to kind of dig in, if you don't mind, and start with one of the insights. And we're really going to cover about 3 of those and provide a little bit of further underneath that. So one of the first insights that we came away with from the report was about key metrics, KPIs, and how those are really providing some higher success factors. And I'll just give you a perspective, having been now in this space for almost 3 years. One of the key areas is, my analogy is, salespeople are now like our professional athletes. We've got sensors all over them, and therefore we have a lot of data and a lot of things. But what is it that differentiates, and how do we use that to help us and help them be successful, I think is one of the key things here. So interestingly, there's been a rule called the Pareto Rule, where it's 80-20, 20% of the sales force usually generates 80% of the revenue. It's been going on for years and decades. But now what we're seeing is that Pareto Rule is no longer holding. That's one of the challenges here. And the other piece is that, because that's not holding, that leaves the other 80% of the sales force not really up to speed. We talk about A players, B players, C players, and they need to have that gap. And those who are able to bring up those B players, or that part of that 80%, will definitely are seeing over, kind of over generation of revenue and high success. So, with that, wanted to, actually, before we go there, wanted to get the panel, especially, Hannah and Mark, as heads of sales, and especially global sales and enterprise. What's your perspective on kind of the rule and what you're seeing especially over the last 5-6 years? Either one. Hannah, why don't you start us?
Yeah. So I would say that this is really what I'm the most passionate about, also in terms of when I feel so fortunate in my job to be able to look out at scale. And so what this is about is, where does the revenue attainment come from? And it seems like a very small percentage of the team contributes to the broader number. And my goal, and where I spend a lot of my time, is to get higher than that 20% average, which we are. But it is something that you see consistently. You see the same or similar people at the top of the leaderboard, similar folks going to club every year. And this is not just in my current team or Zoom. This is in many places, as you're seeing. And so where I feel like we have the opportunity and responsibility as leaders is to figure out how to take what those folks on the top of the leaderboard are doing and figure out what that secret sauce is, and then take away the secret. And in both of my experiences, I've spent a lot of time looking at how to operationalize as much of it as possible. You can never recreate the magic that it is in the hearts of the people that just naturally do it. And usually when you ask those people, what do you do that differentiates yourself? They usually have a tough time explaining what they're doing. And that's why I look to, us as leaders to help them pull that out, so we can then operationalize it and work with folks like Stephanie to really upskill and train and enable and help with the confidence and folks to trust their voice wherever the opportunity comes from. So I definitely see that this stat can be true, and in different organizations and in many, and look to us to continue these conversations to figure out how to spread out some of that.
Excellent. No, definitely. Thank you for that. And I love the operationalized success and those people that we always see, like we call them outliers sometimes because they just do it. They don't know how.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority, there is some ideal rep profiles that we can all dial into, and we can kind of hopefully talk about that at some point. Mark, your perspective?
Yeah, I think that this represents an institutional problem with frontline sales management. If a sales manager can't get 80% of their people to help be more productive, whose fault is that? And I think that the answer is a little bit the frontline sales manager, but I think it's a larger corporate issue of what I see as a disease, which is, hey, Hannah, guess what? You know what? We just hired you to run enterprise sales for Zoom. You're awesome. We're so pumped about you. You get to onboard for 2 days. And now you better get in deals and get on the phone and get busy, right? Versus we give reps, a whole year to ramp. And you could argue that managing is a harder skill than closing deals because it's managing people and expectations and cross-departmental problems. And so to me, this is an indictment on corporate America, inability to supply frontline sales leaders with the tools, the data, the techniques, the training that they need to really drive good and strong rep performance. At Outreach, 70% of our reps typically hit 70% of quota or better because we have a very strong frontline sales manager program and hiring process in place. And I also get amazing help from my enablement team to do those sorts of things.
That's fantastic, Mark. I think you hit on a real kind of in the shadows piece, which is what's happening to those first line managers that have the most impact and responsibility to help achieve that productivity. And I love that. I think, as we go along there, and you've led us to some of the further points there, I think would love to elaborate on it about, what is it that we're doing to help them be enabled as well. So yeah. Cool. So that's, I think, what's interesting is just, and Mark, we weren't leading the witness on this one, but if you look at it, sales teams that do have key, highly defined key KPIs, 71% of them are meeting their 100% of their quota. So you heard Mark saying, around 70% are hitting that. So just in that neighborhood again. But what are those? What's interesting is those pieces there that are being used and the metrics that are being tracked. How are those going to have an impact? And before that, I think I'd love to get a poll from the audience and say, what do you feel? Do you have, about your organization? What kind of KPIs do you feel you have? Good, not so good, not sure? Oops, did I? All right. Sayana, do we have some results?
Yes, it looks like 64% have voted so far.
Okay.
We've got 53% saying yes, 34% saying no, 13% saying not sure.
All right. So 60, 30, 30, is that around there, I thought?
52
yes. Okay.
Saying yes, 36
okay.
saying no.
Okay, got it. And then not sure.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So I'd love this. Then let's, what we found from here is that these are some of the top metrics of seller success. And love to get, take a look at this. It's, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but there's a lot of things that we can measure, and all the tools that we have seem to. Everybody's trying to get a measurement on it so you can figure out an ROI. But what are the ones that really matter? What are those things that you all feel? So kind of coming back to the panel of these top metrics, what do each of you feel contributes to seller success? And Stephanie, as you know, leading enablement, what's your thoughts? What do you feel are the key things?
Yeah, looking at kind of this chart here, I definitely agree that overall we want sellers to be productive. If they're not productive and efficient, ultimately they're not going to be meeting their goals at the end of the day. The trick is, how do you define productivity and efficiency within your organization? So that's something that I think even a lot of enablement leaders are kind of struggling with. Is it's a great kind of buzzword metric of like, yeah, we're measuring the productivity of our teams, but if you take that down to a tactical level, what does that actually look like? And some enablement folks that I've chatted with are doing some very interesting things with kind of being able to measure, the amount of clicks that it takes in Salesforce, and that's how they're starting to define productivity, and how many screens do they have to click through in order to complete a deal or something like that. How many tools do they have to go into in order to kind of like do their job. So I think overall, like, that's a very foundational kind of metric, but it can be a little bit tricky if you don't have that buy-in or the definition from your team. We can very easily just say like, oh, let's measure productivity and leave it at that. But then it's, where is it going to go from there? How do you measure productivity? What does that look like? What is the data going to tell you at the end of the day? So I definitely agree with that very first one there. It's a key foundational one, as long as it's defined properly.
Excellent. And then what do you think of completion, kind of just completion on its own versus completion and others?
Are we talking completion as far as
like the 31% there of training?
Yep. So the tricky thing with completion rates as far as like training and everything goes is that correlation does not always equal causation. So you can complete a training that I've provided to you on pipeline management, but then you hit your quota, and I look at like, oh, you hit your quota. I can't necessarily correlate those two together because there could be any number of factors there. So when it comes to training from like an enablement perspective, before you even come into a training, you have to define what those success metrics actually are going to be and what behavior it is that you're trying to change within your reps. You can't just say they completed a training and they achieved their quota. Ta-da, I'm amazing. Like, I would love to do that. That would be great. But there could be any number of factors that affect that that kind of data. So again, like drilling in and making sure that you define, like I feel like I'm going to like sing this song over and over again throughout this thing, defining the metrics in a very tactical way, and the numbers and what it is that you're tying to is going to be essential to all of these things. And it also gives reps like a North Star to hitch their wagon to as well. Like, this is a metric that I can define, that I know I can go and meet. And that's what they're looking for more often than not.
Yeah, and to Hannah and to Mark, Hannah first, I always look at, there's primary metrics, and you got to keep a couple, three, and then there's supporting metrics, as Stephanie had talked about, and making sure that those are aligned. What's your thoughts with what's important, and what do you all focus on that you find is most impactful?
I would say, and it's funny, I would have said word for word what Stephanie just said, and I talk about the North Star and, where we are all headed and the why. And I feel like the biggest piece in terms of what is needs to happen, no matter based on what we're seeing here, is you need to understand that why. And that comes from top down, bottoms up of leadership. And this, again, relates to what Mark was saying. So many times KPIs or metrics are thrown out to sellers or sales organizations, and more as like, this must happen for you to not be in performance management, or not, not to be on a blacklist. And that's not going to motivate a seller or contribute towards their success. And so from a primary or secondary metric, really the first piece is alignment top down and sharing the why. And I've done, at Zoom, when I started, it was right around the time of the IPO, and I had a lot of assumptions in terms of how far along Zoom was from a structure and operational standpoint. And the good news for me was there was so much more to be done than I thought, based on how successful the company has been. And that was something we aligned on really early around that time, was we need to bring our CRO in, our head of sales organizations in, and get that buy-in from the frontline managers. So as we roll out the metrics, as we roll out whatever those KPIs are, we're all bought into what we're doing together. So that's what I would say is the most important piece.
That's fantastic. I love that. And yeah, I look at it as one of the things is, how do you, that correlation causation, you got to make the connection. Otherwise, it's just, management kind of pressed down versus what's in it for me. Again, I go back to those athletes. What are those incremental things you do when you practice and prepare and plan and do that? By seeing that improvement, it should have a causation in your performance and such. Mark, your thoughts, and I appreciate, by the way, some of the responses you've taken in the chat. So thank you for doing that as well for the audience.
Yeah. Listen, I have a very innovative, progressive, non-traditional CRO that has hired an enablement leader that has a very strong vision of how enablement should work inside a company at large. And it's super aware of the investment that vision creates. And she's really good at getting the investment in the budget to do this kind of stuff. So listen, I think that the bigger conversation isn't what should you measure, how should you measure, is do you even have the ability to measure anything? Do you have the tooling? Do you have the people? Like, I am so lucky. I have a unbelievable enablement partner in my upper segment and in my lower segments. I have one for my growth function. I have something for a new logo. I'm built out because I have a leader in enablement that has brought a new level of awareness of the impact that enablement has inside a company. And so I'm tooled out, and we measure some of the stuff we don't. I guess if I was to summarize our basic philosophy is, like, first of all, are you completing stuff? Like, that's the hard part, is just get reps to do this stuff. The second is what stuff should be graded and what stuff is just fine with just an awareness. And then lastly, what stuff is so critical that we have to have a certification that goes through a vetting process with their manager or someone to help them understand it. And we can do that on hard skills, soft skills. We can do that on training, on competencies. There's a bunch of different things that we can do it around. But I think the macro issue of measurement isn't anyone's willingness. It's do you actually show your willingness by investing in it? And I'm really glad that we have an enablement leader that not only has that vision, but is persuasive enough to work with our C-suite to get the right kind of investment to make sure that my team gets the benefit from that and all the other teams that they work with.
Yeah, that's
Whitney
great.
is my hero, by the way, Mark. Whitney is who I want to be when I grow up.
Whitney, Katie, Camille, Malia, Rob, I'm telling you, I got like this all-star crew. And my job as a sales leader, since they've come on board, feels like 50% easier because they're just knocking stuff out that is typically the stuff that, Hannah, we're sitting around being like, why won't y'all take the stupid trainings? Every time the CRO's on a call, you aren't using the new messaging, and it makes me look bad, and it makes you look bad, and you get into all that. You can measure as much of it as you want, but like ultimately, if you don't invest in the ability to like drive it to execution, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I'll share, one thing that I've had the opportunity to be at places, or like at LinkedIn, I was there, right when it was all product and engineering. I was there for 11 years. And so I went through years before we had enablement. And then I saw what happened the minute we did, right? When you make that investment that Mark is saying, you see and feel a natural shift. And no matter how great your sales organization is, we need that support, and without that, it's not the chicken or the egg. I really see the lever just automatically go up. And even at Zoom, when I started, we had just hired a head of enablement, and we obviously have had. I thought I went through hypergrowth before here, but clearly that was just a trial run at LinkedIn. But when what we've seen is just the consistency and the investment, and it brings a sense of belonging to continue to get invested in, and that commitment. When you merge that together, it does let us in sales do what we are supposed to do, which is sell. Otherwise, before the enablement team is ramped and really there, you have sales leaders, managers, frontline sellers doing the work of that function because it's not there, and that's taking away from their time in the field. So figuring out how we can ramp that enough and stay connected to the heart of sales and our customers and what we actually need to build strategic partnerships is the secret sauce.
That's fabulous, Hannah. And again, you and Mark kind of intimated about first line managers, and I'll throw out to the audience coaching, which is something that'll come there, and having the time and being able to be talented in that coaching is really the difference. I will say this to wrap this piece up is what I saw, sales ops way back when CRM started, as they got elevated, became strategic and were able to contribute and tie the pieces together. That's where you see and you hear that sales enablement or enablement is as they get brought to the table for those conversations and can really pull that together, will drive engagement, will drive motivation, all those things that we know talented sellers are looking for because they want to know that you're invested in them. But we know that they have to be accountable to deliver. So it's that balance too. And I think that's that's the other half of the equation, as you all have outlined. So I think the question I'll leave out there so we can get to more is, an important one is, then why aren't organizations tracking some of those things, no matter what they are? Whether they're, the strategic, not so on. And the sad thing is somehow it's not viewed as a priority for the organization. I think it goes right to what Mark, you highlighted. Who's accountable and who's culpable for that problem? If it doesn't start at the top, if it doesn't start with the most senior people seeing that this is important, and seller performance, which then deals to then how are we doing for our people and enabling them or so on, and then there's difficulty, so on and so forth. So let's see if we can unpack that, there, which is, and start to talk about what is happening in enablement. So the other insight is prioritizing continuous improvement, and I would put that with continuous and personalized training. So it's continuous enablement, and first to the group and then to the individual for those gaps is a catalyst that has translated into revenue. And what we found is, from Aberdeen research, only a third of companies are doing more than onboarding somebody for first month. We talked, Mark, you brought that up. Here we go. This is on, here you go. Here it is going. I remember years and years and years ago with a large company starting with an O. I remember it was, 6 weeks of training, and then you're kicked out of the nest like a little bird and expected to fly or die. And that just doesn't work here. It doesn't work in so many ways, including being able to attract the best talent and retain the best talent. The other part is that forgetfulness curve, which is, concerning that people do forget 75% of that information if there's no way to reinforce and make it, embody it, and be part of that, and have that become part of your DNA and evolve you as well. Those who have been doing things called a conditioned tendency, been doing things and have been successful till now or till recently, are not going to continue to be successful in today's environment. I don't care what industry and in what arena. The things are changing and people have to evolve and adapt to that. And that's not only enablement, but also good sales coaching and from the managers that are there responsible. So, and that's an area there. The other is those who that onboarding is really everboarding now. So those who continue, and we'll do that. 75% of those is effective, is because they continue to do that and look at it as everboarding. Stephanie, your perspective, as in enablement on onboarding versus everboarding, and then there's always, to Hannah, Mark, and myself, what's that balance of too much enablement that gets in the way of productivity, right? So with that, Stephanie, your thoughts.
It is a very fine line between too much information and not enough information.
Yeah.
I think especially in today's world, one of the things I've actually heard a colleague at one of my last companies mention this is there's a difference between kind of the push enablement and the pull enablement. Ideally, you want some of those like high level initiatives, like if you're rolling out new messaging, if you've got new value propositions, new kind of product features, stuff like that, you do need to push that out to the teams. But at the same time, you do want to create kind of a culture of learning within an organization, which is easier said than done. But ultimately, you want reps to be able to pull information from your teams as well, usually around skill development or how do I kind of like sharpen my skill sets here or there, whatever it might be. To me, in my past experiences, it's always come down very much so to like building trust with both your frontline managers and your reps. And that also takes a little bit of time. Like the theme of enablement is it takes time. And the way that you build trust with your reps and your frontline managers is you start producing content and training that's actually valuable and impactful. And then when you do need to push training to them again, they're more willing to accept it. And then they'll come back to do the pull training a little bit more. So making sure that the content that you're providing to them is impactful and valuable to their roles, not just what you think their roles might be, but actually what they're telling you, like listen to the field. And then being able to like execute on that feedback that you're getting from the reps as well, like this was too much or this wasn't enough. I'm a big believer in like always recalibrating with the teams to make sure like, am I doing enough or am I doing too much? Like, let's kind of pump the brakes in some areas or step on the gas in others. So I think the everboarding aspect of things especially is definitely one of those pieces that will take some calibration depending on your teams, the length of your sales cycles, how transactional you are, the experience of the reps on the teams as well, definitely needs to come into play there as well.
I would also add that it's such a fine window to lose the sales organization in terms of attention. And so as I saw someone posted in the Q&A, which we haven't answered yet, but about how that they're trying to sell through and push through an enablement program, it has to be so thought out, I believe, in the beginning to get the and throughout, but to get the attention of the sellers so that they get that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they get value from the onboarding right away, they're going to be more inclined to then stay in tune with the continual training. Also, if you have it be from them, you bring in top sellers, the ones we're talking about, you bring in cross-functional folks, the more that it's not just the enablement team delivering or one key executive delivering everything. I think that's where you can lose the value. And Ahmed, you said it talked about how a salesperson is like a professional athlete. Professional athletes are surrounded by teams, and they're surrounded by coaches, and they're surrounded by all the things that if I was super into sports, I would list a lot of other functions that are there cheering these people on. But it's not just the star of the team. And I believe that the more we focus on that, the more we will have success. And I was just talking to a candidate, really impressive person, who was saying that he focuses on the fundamentals. And he shared how in the NBA, when they first on TV, they first started allowing us to hear the conversation between the coach and the athletes. And what they said, what surprised him when he first started hearing this, it was all about the fundamentals. So much that we need to spend our time doing are the basics. And that's what I talk to my organization a lot about as well. So how with enablement, you want things to be new, cool, and sexy to get the attention, yet at the same time, it really needs to be grounded in the tried and true operational process, sales effectiveness, and that's where excellence comes from.
Yeah, and you hit on something, and I want to make sure that I don't sell in any way, but there is an aspect here, which is I got on with a CRO, and I said, "What's important to you?" And he said, "Game film," and which I love. And he then expressed that's really being able to see and understand and get really the metrics and insights from that conversation that's being had, and pull that back into enablement. Not only voice, not just deal intelligence, which absolutely, that's what conversation intelligence, that's the first thing, but really pull that in and have that be circular so that we know where and how, both at the program level and then the individual. So that's a real important one. I wanted to kind of keep going, if you don't mind, just so we can make sure we had this and wrap it up. And what to get a pull from everybody, what describes your onboarding program?
All right,
No,
we've
we won't.
launched a poll. We've got some folks starting to answer.
Mhm.
For those of you, if you can't see it, if you go down to the more button and pull up polling, you can view the poll live. We've got 41% voted. The top answer is the most highly voted so far.
30, 60, 90.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Med, one thing I think is super
Yeah.
important to stress about continuous learning is that is not an enablement problem. That's a cultural problem.
Yes.
And so if you want to drive continuous learning, don't hire a bunch of enablement people. As leaders, start to continuously learn. Start to show reps how to continuously learn. Be a model. Like, I hope my reps do me. I do all of the trainings that I ask my reps to do.
Mhm.
You know, I go out and learn on my own. And when I read a cool LinkedIn post about something, I post it in the Slack channel to show everybody else I'm doing it and trying to get better too. And so, like, listen, I think continuous learning is much more of a cultural issue than it has anything to do with enablement or tools or anything like that.
You are so right. You know, we people, you know, that whole lifelong learner that comes out, you know, that, and people, we do as leaders, we need to embody by action what we do, how we do, and our habits. You're absolutely right that that will drive, and that has to come down because that establishes expectations. Just as the gentleman or the lady, I can't remember who had that question, you know, in the Q&A, saying, you know, the company culture is one of, you know, all that stuff is fluff. Well, that's that culture, that cultural aspect and that perspective. So you're absolutely right. Everything else flows from there.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Let us continue here. So, you know, so what's holding organizations back from really doing consistent seller training? I mean, I'd have to say 30, 60, 90, get up, get going, but then there's just so much going on. And how do we, you know, how do we maintain that in a balanced way, as we've all said? Not too much, not too little, kind of the Goldilocks paradox, but it is but just enough and the right amount in the right way, and has to be engaging, and so that the sellers will get that. You know, talk about seller engagement. What is it that they're going to? What's in it for them? You know, we know the prize, that North Star is achieving or increasing quota, but there's so much that goes into that. Any thoughts here from there? Especially, I will give Stephanie, since you've got that sales enablement component. Do you see, you know, what do you see in successful situations like you have, and then what do you see from your peers that may be where they're challenged?
So usually I see the organizations that I've seen it do really, really well is usually from that, like, that top-down approach to what Mark was saying, is that, like, the leaders are actually doing the trainings and they're the ones that are kind of advocating. And it's not just like, do this because I said so, it's do it because this is what we're focused on for this next quarter, this next half, or whatever it might be. Usually the excuse that I hear from most reps and even frontline managers is usually, we don't have time for this. I don't have time to take my reps off the phone. In which case it's like, let's dive into that a little bit deeper. To Hannah's point from earlier, how are we operationalizing the teams in order to make it so that they are able to level themselves up and kind of continue that? Like, is there something before we roll out this training that we should be fixing first before we go and just like shove this at them? Cultures of learning don't just happen. The pull, right? The pull from learning doesn't just happen. It does kind of come from the entire culture of the company. And one of the things that I've even chatted with, like, our leadership here at WorkRamp is, let's set aside time at least once a month where it's just like dedicated time for maybe a couple of hours during the month where you set everything else aside and you're focused on training and whatever it might be, and you give that permission as leadership, and you're not sending them messages about other things, and the leaders are actually practicing this as well. So that's something of, like, giving your reps permission to, like, let's take a break for a second. I'm not going to, like, drill you about these other, you know, issues or deals or, like, whatever's going on. Like, let's zero in on what is happening here. Really, like, carving out that time, because if you don't carve out that time and give them permission to use that time for the specified initiative, they just won't do it because they've got a quota that they have to get to. So, like, all of these things kind of have to fall into place and be folded together in order to kind of accomplish the ultimate goal and get away from the we don't have time.
Yeah, no, it harkens to me what's from Alice in Wonderland? Is it the rabbit that runs around with the watch?
Yes.
Doesn't have time, and it is, and we all have that because there's so much to do and so much coming at us. But I love of pulling that out and saying no, it is important. Practice, and I would say skills and practicing are both important because that's the other thing. I don't know about you all, but my perspective to my team is planning and preparation is 90% and performance is 10%. When you think about the amount of time that you're actually engaged with that customer on some things, so but and so what are we doing to ensure that we're helping them structure in a way to be prepared? And you love that.
Part of the problem,
Yeah.
part of the problem is how we define learning.
Yes.
Most of us define learning by going back to our K through 12 and college days where we sit in a classroom for multiple hours a day with multiple hours of homework. That's not learning as an adult.
Yep.
No adult has a time for that. So if that's your idea of learning, you're never going to learn.
Yeah.
I've actually done a whole series of posts this week on LinkedIn about micro-learning. How can I read 2 pages a day?
Right.
Do you know how much you can learn in 2 pages that takes less than 10 minutes to read? Do you know how much you can learn from a podcast if you actually know how to process and think about the information and figure out how you're going to employ it? And the problem is that in America, we have set a definition of learning that causes every adult to say that they don't have time. We have to change the definition as leaders to can you spend 5 minutes a day learning half of one new thing that's semi-interesting to you. If you can get somebody to do that 1 or 2 days a week, it'll change their life. And so the issue to me isn't like, do you have time or not? It's that you do have the time. Every rep has the time. It's just we don't have the time for the way that we have defined learning most of our lives.
Yeah, no, you could bring a great point. When we're dealing with our prospects and customers, one of the challenges, have they made that the chasm shift from just a ton of content thrown at them and very dense, or have they broken it up so that it's available to the person when they need it, how they need it, and where they need it? To your point, and we see that in the consumer side of things, master classes, lots of things. It's all about the bits that are there to help you continue to hone the skills and the point in need. And you're absolutely right. And you can see success or failure ahead of you based on how you're approaching that strategy and how you're delivering. We help a lot of our customers. One of the first things we do is let us help you redefine that content and what you're doing and how you're doing, so it's engaging and something that someone will use and benefit from. So completely love that point there. Kind of going on, what's knowledge building tactics here. Of the respondents who hit 100% of their sell quota, 57 relied heavily on coaching to build knowledge within their organization. So interestingly enough, with what Mark talked about, that the structured, micro learning versus heavy content versus how, K through 12 type of things. And what we're doing here, if you look at it, coaching and micro learning, and then there's also role playing and so on, all the things that are successful seem to be driven there, but coaching is the one thing we hadn't talked about, but we did hit on it with the Mark you brought up about first line managers and also Stephanie, you brought up about the buy-in from the managers themselves and the participation. So that's the other piece here, that it's we talked about skills development, practice, and also good coaching. Love to get into here as we go forward. What is good coaching? What's our view on those things? Anybody want to share? From Mark or Hannah, especially as as sales leaders. The point about coaching.
Absolutely. And I really do think the hardest, most important role at a company is the first line manager. I tell that in my organization all the time. The scale is there, but it is hard. Everyone is trying to get their time. They're still so in the field, and what Stephanie talks about really rings true in terms of prioritizing their time. And I believe, like, no matter if it's from marketing, product, enablement, whoever, there should be a calendar, a plan on what is going to the field, and then what is that path to get there, so that the managers, and all of us, but the managers can spend that time coaching their teams based on the cadence, based on the themes, based on the North Stars that the organization has mapped out. And something that's been successful in my current organization has been, we haven't yet gotten to the calendar. We're still building the engine as we're flying the plane, is in a recent analogy I heard. But the frontline leaders and the teams that do really well with coaching and practice are where they weave it in naturally and they kick it off. So I had one leader, we were rolling out a new piece of our platform, and he said, okay, you know what, we're going to be pitching each other, we're going to be practicing together, and we're going to use the next X team meetings to do that, and I'm going to go first. And it was very new. We had gotten very little so far from the organization, and that trust that was built allowed him to then turn that, and the team then did the same thing, but they were all in it together. So really, really thinking about, it's not just coaching from your frontline manager, bringing in the peers to provide feedback, bringing in the cross-functional team. I very much believe that it's on all of us to do, but we need that leader to prioritize that time, because otherwise we'll go back to that excuse that we all hear and talked about all the time. So I think coaching and practice are really mixed in, and making sure that it's consistent, because it's not just training, but that we consistently then weave in the real-time feedback, and coaching is also part of the DNA.
Yeah, if you don't have that loop to come back, and being vulnerable is something, I think, as a leader, they talk about that, but being vulnerable, in other words, saying, I'm trying to improve myself.
Exactly.
And to Mark's point, I not only do all the enablement my teams do, we all do from a sales leadership at Mindtickle, but I kind of compete with them a little bit too. If I have time to do that with everything I have, just to ensure that people are doing it, but then it's the quality of the work, not just the quantity of the work there. So excellent.
And I would also urge, one thing that we did in my org was enablement rolled out through a tool, a competition on a pitch. To simplify it. And so it was a competition between different organizations. And so I love, obviously I'm in sales and I love competition. And so I told my whole organization that if we were number one, I would dye my hair pink. And my daughter got to pick out the color, and we had this whole thing. And every single day we were talking about it. They couldn't wait to be number one, but it allowed it. We kept practicing because we wanted to get our scores higher and higher. And we won. I dyed my hair pink. Everyone at home and work was happy, but just making sure that it's not just about the content, but that it really can be something that you do something cute together as a team to bring it home, and that people can remember the feeling that something like that brings them, that is so much more than just the content that they're digesting.
I love it. I said I would shave my head, and
clearly you won.
Right. We talked about practice. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
I said short-term challenges, not long-term, my man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm much better, and it saves me on shampoo, conditioner, and lots of other.
There you go. That's a win.
Let's talk about the last insight, because I do want to make sure that we get to the Q&A and others, because you're seeing a lot of great insights from the panel. Practice is important, but teams struggle to optimize kind of the resource, because it is not just a singular thing. It's kind of a wraparound thing, as you've heard from everybody. It's it's ranked as the highest area of importance, but it's one of the least things that's used there in tactically in sales enablement. And by the way, I would say that most of the prospects and customers we talk to, when we're having the conversation, talk about coaching. Oh, coaching is so important. When we ask them how they do it or how they do that, there's just a blank, kind of a blank or just a pause. And so I think it's also important to understand, as you've heard from Hannah and Mark and Stephanie, how you approach that. Because it's, because with practice and coaching, you see that practice says 57 of the respondents effective practice helped them achieve that. So when you look at that, including kind of the pillars of having great enablement, continuous enablement, the right level, practicing and coaching all together seem to be those three pillars that will really have the biggest impact. Not easy to do, but we're getting some insights here. Just out of curiosity, how do you all rate kind of your own practice tactics?
Looks like somewhat effective is coming out on top.
Got it. Nice. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think while we're closing that out, let me kind of move on to the next one. And, we talk about somewhat effective. So kind of when you look at the effective sales enablement programs that leverage practice, these are some of the respondents about why they felt it was not effective for them, or probably somewhat effective. Stephanie, your thoughts, and love to get your perspective and maybe even insights on how people can possibly overcome some of these challenges or barriers.
I think the biggest one that we're seeing there is limited content, resources, guides, training materials to kind of build out that library as it stands. This is something that every enablement team runs into, because usually we are a small but mighty team. So in creating that content on a pretty consistent basis is definitely difficult. I would say one of the things that I usually, the approaches that I take, I would say to build out like these content libraries is, how can I leverage maybe already existing material that's taking place, or how do I capture those like team meeting learnings and trainings that are inevitably happening with frontline managers? How do I capture those and then store them in an LMS, for example, like some kind of enablement tool where they can then be leveraged for any kind of, like, again, everboarding and even looped back into onboarding. So if it's a super crucial training or tip or trick or something that's happening, can I leverage that again and like plop it into my library where reps can then pull that information if they need to? It's not easy, but I usually, like, I'm pretty scrappy when it comes to content. So what can I find on YouTube? What can I link to from a PDF or something that's already existing? Or can we leverage already, a Udemy or a LinkedIn Learning or something like that in order to kind of create that content? Finding ways that you can easily and kind of in a scrappy way get the information that you need, and not focus on like, oh my God, I have to like create this like huge training. What can I supplement that already exists that will get the same point across? And then I can come in and layer on like, how does this apply to our business in particular? So you start with like high level, and then how does it apply to our business? That's an easier way to kind of do this, but I think, to Mark's point from earlier, like really investing in the support teams, like the enablement teams or your L&D teams internally, in order to create that kind of information in that library is super crucial.
Yeah, no, I'd love it. And this is something that we run into a lot, and I will provide this kind of guidance. Is I think looking at content as something you have to build is limiting, right? As you said, Stephanie, because it is required. But there's so much content when you look at in the sales field, where that practice, you can give the content as here's a benchmark of a pitch or an objection handling or all those things that are out there, and take those and provide that as a way to also have that micro learning that that Mark talked about, and then have people come back and practice on that or see how they work against that benchmark. That's where that game film also comes in so well, that if you really utilize it back into enablement, you don't have to put the burden on your team, Stephanie, or sales enablement team to require to do all of that. And it's more you're the maestro pulling them together, and it's bite sized, but it's really impactful. That's some of the things that we've been doing as best practices that we found, even in new hires. A lot of the new hires want those can I drive alongs, right? Can I see this? Can I do this? we actually, what we do is give them the conversation intelligence, those snippets or those calls, and give them a whole library and say, here's good ones, here's bad ones, here's a couple of things there. And as one of my new hires said, I was able to sit and in one day do 6 drive-alongs without going anywhere. And I was able to get that, and it really ramped them up, and they were able to benefit from it coming out of that ramp and be productive all the way. So different ways, different cultures, different situations, but yeah, I love that.
Practice has an implication. And the implication is that the rep has to own their own development. And what I mean by that is, like, think back to when you were in high school and your favorite teacher in high school. Probably a little bit entertaining, kind of funny, inclusive, educating, a little bit challenging. But if you just sat in that teacher's room and just listened to the class every day and didn't do the homework and didn't have a study group and didn't take the practice exams and didn't do all those sorts of things, you wouldn't have gotten an A in the class, no matter how great the teacher was and how much you liked them. But when we move into our sales careers, we think if we sit on the 30-minute weekly enablement session, that all of a sudden we're going to get the A in the next exam, and that's ridiculous. Reps have to take part of their own development. They have to own part of their development. Practice is a reflection of how much a rep is willing to own their own development. A rep that practices will always outperform a rep that practices on their customers. And so I think that that's what, reps need to, some of this webinar is about what leaders need to do. Some of it's about what enablement needs to do, but some of it needs to be about what the rep has to do. And you can't create practice if a rep is unwilling to own their own development and think they can just sit in the 30-minute weekly meeting and be good at stuff.
The ideal rep profile, when we talk about that, Mindtickle, one of those aspects is, underlying that self-starter, or that person that will influence. One that's good salespersonship, but also it does drive that inner drive that you're absolutely right, Mark. It has to be, they have to own it as well. Cool. Hannah, did you have anything? Just didn't want to.
No, I think I was actually going to say what Mark said. I was going to share, and that the theme of my organization was around the NBA this year, and how practice is the #1 thing, and it's up to each of us to not just show up to practice, but then actually do the work. And so it really ties into what Mark was saying. Yeah,
do that extra work. If you want to be better, do the extra work, and that invariably helps you be successful. So kind of just to wrap up and hopefully get to a couple of the Q&A, really the kind of this, there is this crisis in a way, and maybe overused, but sales readiness here is, as you've heard from everybody, it's everyone's business and everyone has to contribute to it. And it comes from having the right content, because a lot of teams don't feel they may have the right content. It's too heavy, not relevant, not dated. Half the teams need additional resources to really kind of execute those good enablement tactics. How do you help them get there without having to take the whole burden? And over a third of the sales leaders are still looking for technology that integrates it all and makes it there. And this is the one slide where I get to make a little bit of a pitch, but it is regardless of where you go and how you go, you do have to define that excellence that we talked about, both culturally and from the metrics that we talked about at the beginning. You have to have a way to build that knowledge. You have to have that relevant content and be able to do that. You have to definitely analyze with the right metrics that support that, and then you can optimize it. That's the loop back that we talked about. But the key here that I would urge everyone to think is, how do you bring it together so that you can have one view, one dashboard of how this all comes together, and you can kind of identify where things are going well, where they aren't. You're trying to bring them from 5-6 different sources. It's going to be really difficult. So how you correlate that and then correlate that to the results and do it easily will help all of you as sales leaders or heads of enablement not only see where there's results, but also be able to come to the table and say, here how enablement is moving the needle for the organization from contributing to those results. So with that, wanted to, we have only got a few minutes, but wanted to ask if, some of the Q&A, if anybody, any of the panel wants to respond. Jill, you all can see, Jill
I can
how
take
do you
this
measure
one.
the metrics?
Yep. So Jill asked, how do you measure metrics that are equitable or ensure that metrics are equitable across the board? Do you consider diverse backgrounds and varying degrees of experience when building metrics? Absolutely. I would definitely say, depending on who it is that you're measuring, like, it doesn't make sense for you to measure, say, a strategic sales rep against a commercial sales rep, and that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I definitely think that this is something that I would work with frontline managers and your executive leadership to define what's your ideal hiring profile, first and foremost. Like, what are you looking for in those types of teams? What are the skill sets that are needed? And then what are some of the metrics then that, like, you want to kind of like take them to that next level? So I definitely think that it should be based on the team, their tenure, their experiences, and what are they ultimately held to at the end of the day? What are the metrics that we're going to be measuring them against anyway, and then how do we up level them from there?
Excellent. Cool. Hopefully that's provided an answer. And then, how are we tracking seller engagement? Does anybody have any of the panel have a good answer for that?
Seller engagement, how would you define that?
Yeah,
I think it
exactly.
kind of depends on,
Yeah.
again, it just comes down to the definitions of what do you define as engaged.
Yep, yeah. I think it starts with culture, and then what you're trying to pull with the sellers, and then how they are responding to that, and there's a calibration there. Sam, we have hit the hour and done that. Want to turn it over to you? Anything more?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all so much. I've learned so much. I'm very excited to pull nuggets out of this for some clips to share. So thank you all, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone that attended. We'll see you at another Sales Hacker live event.
Thanks
Fantastic.
so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all from the panel. Wonderful to sit with you. And anybody, if you want more information, I'm happy to direct. It'll just be more insight or guidance than anything else.